relation to the Limerick DEIS Primary Schools Literacy Initiative, would I be correct in saying that the Department of Education at a policy level was really instrumental in driving this, that it possibly wouldn't have been as successful and long sustaining without policy at a national level or a regional level?
Right. I think you're right. I think it was key to it, Angie. Angie, do you mind? I need to plug in my laptop.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Sorry, just for a second. I just need to bend down and plug in my laptop.
No, you're fine.
Apologies for this. Okay. Yeah, I think, Angie, I think that's very correct. I don't think the buy-in from the schools wouldn't have taken place without the department's support, because a lot of this work really happened with the sanction of the department, and also with the granting of the additional teachers. They were key for schools to get ownership of this initiative and to drive the initiative themselves. Also because it was, I would visit then in my capacity as inspector with my colleagues, schools, to find out how they were progressing. So we constantly kept in touch with schools. I think that was very, very important. But schools didn't see it in the old-fashioned way of someone coming to see, you know, here's the person checking up on us. I think they saw the role as very much a supportive role and a role to support the literacy needs of the children in the schools themselves. But I think it was key, Angie, actually, yeah.
Yeah, because I think, Carmel, just going on from the Limerick experience of this, that it did actually change the relationship between this external inspector that traditionally would have gone into schools and made unannounced inspections into the classroom, to more of a partnership approach where the inspector worked, or the Department of Education Inspectorate, the Limerick Inspectorate section, worked with the school.
Yeah, and I suppose the department has that dual role anyway through the inspectorate of advising and supporting and then inspecting. And we still do drop into schools, Angie,
yeah,
and unannounced, and we still do those things. But I suppose if you want to change schools and you want schools to change themselves, then you have to be able to work with schools on where they are at to move to the next step. And I think that's very, very important, to be able to recognise where schools are and their specific contexts.
Okay, Carmel, just on the chat function, a couple of questions. Do we understand well that literacy coaches are a sort of teacher? They're talking about the teachers that were assigned. How were they assigned? So the teacher mentors. And were they assigned? And it says here, are the coaches assigned to other competencies too? It was solely just on literacy.
Solely on literacy, and initially the teachers were very much teachers who had invested in their own professional development, had a track record of working in this area. As the project progressed, that was an issue, because the network teachers were shared with other schools. So many of the more experienced teachers decided they wouldn't do it. So you had teachers who opted in or were assigned by their principal. So in some instances, these were very young, inexperienced teachers, but on the other hand, they did develop expertise. So did they have any formal qualifications? No, they were usually self-nominating. And you see, the project couldn't ask for a particular teacher. In Ireland, the assignment of teachers is the core role of the principal teacher, and the management of teachers is the principal teacher. So even though we asked for nominations, but it was up to the schools to decide. So this was an area the department could not give direction in.
Right, okay. Another question, what does it mean, balanced literacy framework?
Yeah, the Balanced Literacy Framework was a concept that one of our lecturers in Mary Immaculate College devised. Martin, I can't think of his surname. Martin Gleeson, thank you. And it's basically, I can send you, it's actually in the effective promoting communities of effective practice.
Okay.
It's in that document there. And
everybody has that.
Oral language, reading, phonological awareness, comprehension skills, It's the whole circle. It's there in a circular infographic in the middle of the document. So you can have a look at that there. That's the balanced literacy
Yeah,
instruction
I
is
have that
explained
up
there.
on the team site for everybody, but I'll share it with Adele as well. And it's what does our language school plan mean? Sorry, Carmel, now I know these things, but if you could.
What does our language?
School plan.
Sorry, school plan.
Yeah.
So under school self-evaluation, schools are asked to identify their 3 areas of greatest need. So under the balanced literacy framework, most schools obviously targeted comprehension skills because the baseline data would have shown that this was a huge issue, but also children's oral language skills were really poor. And so they devised a plan for all the school from infants up to 6th class and how to teach oral language through the school every week and the sorts of concepts and skills that were being developed. And they worked with speech and language therapists to outline the receptive and expressive language skills that children would need at different areas. And they linked those to the primary language curriculum.
Okay, very good. And actually, this is a good question. Is the networking efforts of DEIS teachers acknowledged somehow? Like, for instance, is the number of lessons taken into their work, or for example, I suppose what they're asking was, did they get remission for involvement in this particular area?
Normally Monday to Thursday, the DEIS network teachers, who are now no longer, unfortunately, because the project has completely ended at this stage, but from 2011 to 2020, they would work Monday to Thursday in their 2 schools. And then on Friday, they had a day of meeting where they could research, find out new things, talk about what was happening, get readings, get materials, get approaches, lesson plans. So they had a full day of organisation for the following week, yes.
Okay.
This would be very unusual.
Okay. Now, if I open it up to the open it up to the group, if anyone wants to ask any questions.
Hello. I'm Nicolina Jaidela Hrustek, and I deal with digital literacy. What about the digital literacy and including the ICT in this whole plan?
We didn't look at that. That was one area we did not investigate.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But because
and I know it's a priority now.
Yes. I research in this area. My research area is inclusion, digital inclusion, and because of that, I ask this question. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we just didn't include it at the time.
But it's Carmel, in the new numeracy concentration now. Certainly, the problem-based learning, critical thinking, and creative thinking is one of the is really strongly emphasized. Just conversations I've had with Dr. John O'Shea, who's providing CPD at the moment to the teachers in the numeracy plan.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you, but we just, in fact, I suppose many developments have happened since then, and the digital literacy came in afterwards. We hadn't focused on it in our initial plan, and it's something we should have done, but we didn't do it at the time.
Mm-hmm. Now a question has come: is it a plan though? I suppose it's more maybe an initiative, was it? But it was a plan as well, because I'll let you, Carmel, answer that.
From our point of view, it was a plan with the schools themselves, but it was up to each of the schools to plan their own plan. So schools have to take ownership of their own plan. We had our initial plan for our project, but then it was up to each of the schools to incorporate that into their own school self-evaluation plan and their whole school approaches. Yeah. Schools in Ireland get a lot of freedom to do to prioritise their areas themselves, and we have to work within that whole framework. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Just said it seems many participants want to ask questions but can't. Anybody that can't use the chat function, would you mind just unmuting your mic and asking a question? And it doesn't matter. We don't matter, Carmel. We'll interpret the question as best we can. So don't be afraid to ask a question. And if you want to put up your hand, at least I can identify or can see who wants to ask a question. Okay. Carmel, can I just ask about the funding? Overall, did it cost much? Like between, was it, did the dormant funds account cover it, or?
The money from Atlantic Philanthropies was about 570,000, and most of that money was spent on providing the professional development cover, the substitute teacher cover, and the other was for the project worker at the time. If I got 570,000 again for a project, would I spend it that way? I probably wouldn't.
Okay.
So, but that was why the money was given initially. I'm sure schools themselves, because of the staffing now, they can release teachers probably a little easier without substitute cover. So I'm not sure, but that was the way the funding was given for at the particular time. I've always had concerns about it myself, and then because teachers wanted to have access, sometimes a different teacher came every time. So maybe if we were back again, we could have put more, I suppose, defining parameters about who would come to the training,
Okay.
who would come and engage. So, you know, it's easy to know all of these things after a project. The project has had a lot of very positive impact on the work of schools. Could it have had more impact? I'm sure if we were to start again, we would probably be a bit more astute in how we would have managed the initiative itself. We were under terrible pressure to apply for the money within a fortnight and to put the plan together. So that sort of, there was no pilot phase, there was no great thinking out phase. We were under significant pressure to get the application in.
Yeah.
So we would work out in a different initiative now. Having said that, its impact has been quite substantial in schools.
Okay. And the other question now, but I think, Carmel, that's possibly the way with a lot of initiatives, that you need almost, in a way, I think it's a shame that the funding didn't continue, because the lessons learned from the first phase could be applied to the second phase. But perhaps maybe the emphasis now on numeracy, the numeracy initiative, that some of the lessons there could be applied. Just one of them said they'd be happy to see an example for the oral language plan. But Carmel, there's probably in that report there is some examples, isn't there? Exemplars.
There wouldn't be exemplars of whole school plans. No, you'd have to actually ask Tracy. Maybe ask Tracy for a copy of her, because Maria Dervin, her school particularly, I think, has been working on oral language. So that might be something, she might be able to give you a copy of her oral language plan for her school. So each school will have a different oral language plan.
Yeah, okay, perfect. I'll do that.
I think they're stunned into silence after all of that, Angie.
Well, it's very interesting, Carmel. So I think, anything else?
You know what? If there are any questions subsequently, come back to me and I can send you whatever. People will think of things afterwards. And if you want to come back to me at some stage, I'll email you if I can guide them in any other way.
Yeah. Another thing that is written there, how is the networking efforts at the DEIS schools, was it acknowledged somehow?
It was informal. in the sense of the acknowledgement was at local level. There was no certificate, there was no award, there was no link to a professional development certification, nothing like that. It was very much voluntary, that people volunteered to be the network teacher, and their reward was from seeing the progress within the schools themselves. And obviously they were acknowledged by the steering committee, but there was no external award system. We don't have that system here. All teachers are considered qualified teachers, and we don't have you know, expert teachers.
Yeah. Okay. And the other thing are there coaches assigned to other competencies too? No, they wouldn't really. As said, it's quite general. I suppose our system of primary education is that you qualify as a primary school teacher, and there is an expectation that you can work across all of the different areas, even special education needs. Really, up until very recently, we didn't have special qualifications for them.
Yeah, so there are no coaches. Now, people who have expertise in areas, teachers who have expertise, usually join the PDST, and it's a really good website to look at, pdst.ie. It's the professional development support for teachers. And on that website, you will see all the professional development seminars that are organised for teachers countrywide. You will also see the resources that are available to teachers, and that is for the primary and post-primary curriculum. There is also a website, jct.ie, which is on junior cycle reform, and it's for children from 12 to 15 and their teachers, and it outlines all the new messages on curriculum reform and all the resources that are available there. You also have ncca.ie, which is the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, and that is the group that outlines the curriculum for Irish primary and post-primary schools, and also you will see some preschool materials there.
Okay.
We also have CSL, the Centre for School Leadership, csl.ie, and that is the centre that provides professional development for school principals at primary and at post-primary. And the last one I'll mention is NCSE, the National Council for Special Education, ncse.ie, and they have a range of supports plus their seminars for professional development for teachers dealing with special needs children. And all the resources are there as well. So PDST is the primary professional development, NCCA is the curriculum, NCSE is the special ed, JCT is the junior certificate of post-primary, and CSL is the leadership.
Yeah. I mean, it's correct, Carmel, isn't it, that I'd say in the last 20 years, the number of supports, particularly the CSL, JCT, etc., that those supports have really grown around the schools. You know, a partnership approach has really been emphasised.
Our first, I suppose, our first legal basis for our education system came with the publication of the Education Act in 1998. And in 1998, a range of resources then were put in place for children with special education needs because it became a legal requirement. So therefore, a range of professional development and other supports also were put in place there. So we are, I suppose, a country with a lot of circulars and guidelines published by the department. But for the first time in 1998, this heralded a range of other legislation that came on board to guide the work of schools. So now we have the Education Welfare Act, we have the Special Needs legislation, and I'm trying to think what others we have. Teaching Council legislation. Yeah. So since 1998, there has been a raft of legislation and a raft of change and development in Irish education.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Carmel. The other thing, Igor asked a very interesting question. As I understood, you managed to use funds that were left over when the project was over. Is that usual practice in Ireland? Usually for us, when funding is over, then the project is over.
Well, interestingly, that would normally be the case as well, Igor, but in this instance, Atlantic Philanthropies, because it had ceased to exist and ceased to disperse its money, SSIRL no longer continued, so there was no one to give the money back to. So the person in the department, Patricia Sheehan and myself, decided the money was intended for the schools. So we made a local, with the steering committee, decision to disperse the money back to the schools because we had no one else to give it to. So it could have remained in a fund going from year to year on a balance sheet with nobody using it. So we decided the schools would make the best use out of it.
Okay.
But you're right, it's same here. But in this instance, the framework no longer existed.
Right. And
Thank
Carmel,
you for clearing that up. Thank you.
Yeah. Carmel, can I ask, after the project, were there resources? Okay, there was the final report, but were there resources, specific resources developed for the school so that there was a legacy left? Or
we didn't do a curriculum development project, so we didn't actually write resources for the schools. We let the schools develop and compile their own resources. So I suppose that was one of the, separate to the curriculum development unit in Mary I, which would devise, we felt that the resource they should be using is the curriculum, and then contextualizing that to their own specific area and pulling from a range of resources. So certainly schools under their DEIS allocation each year would get a grant towards resources as well, so schools could use that funding.
Yeah, very good.
Schools compiled, but we didn't actually devise curriculum materials for schools themselves.
Okay, so it was specific. It was really around the development of teacher competencies in
teacher skills, competency, and agency, and it was an investment in teachers.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you think did it build that community of practice after, like, I don't know, Carmel, are you still involved in it? Have those teachers still maintained, the funding is gone now, so do they maintain, is there a network that's still there that, where those teachers meet regularly or share information, or do they do any sort of open door policies or open door days where they come in? Or
the open doors continued really into the last phase of the project, and the last time we really had open doors was in February when we visited schools in Armagh, which is in the north of Ireland, to visit teachers teaching through STEM. So I suppose we've continued to, and VEX robotics, particularly where open door policy, where people went and visited other schools as they were engaging with VEX robotics. And I don't know whether you are familiar with VEX robotics, but certainly worth looking at. It's a great initiative for schools. So there was a lot of sharing of practice there, and on the problem solving, a lot of sharing of practice, and schools came together there to review their practices in maths teaching, and they worked together in small groups with personnel from Mary I as well. So COVID, of course, has changed everything because teachers cannot meet. They cannot meet in their own schools, really. It's a huge issue, and they cannot meet across schools because of cross-contamination. But the Uscailt network is a very strong network of principals still, and certainly teachers meet and visit each other as required, but it's not as frequent as previously.
Okay, very good. I think they're all the questions I have, Carmel, that I think that the partners would be interested in. Yeah, I suppose the legacy issue about the continuing of partnership would be really important, so that once the money, once the funding has finished, that you would like that group to continue working together in other guises.
But teachers know each other now from other schools.
Yeah.
And principals know each other well. And prior to that, there would have been, I suppose, some competitiveness between schools looking for children as such, seeking enrollment and pupil population, because the pupil population is declining in the city. So the schools were under pressure, but that competitiveness has ceased, and there's more of mutual, I suppose, collaborative work going on between schools themselves. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Excellent. Thanks, Carmel.
You're very welcome, Angie. Yeah. You're very welcome. Thank you very much,
okay.
Everybody.
Okay.
I'm going to leave now. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Thank you, Carmel.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks so much, Carmel. Thank you.
Welcome, Angie. Bye.
Bye.